Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us online for one of our XR Network Plus seminars. Uh, if you've not been to one of these before, we try to get together every month if we can to discuss and share and hear about some of the projects that XR Network Plus has been involved in. And so today's seminar focuses on two different projects that have been led by the University of Nottingham. And so we're going to hear about both today. We'll be welcoming Sarah Martindale and her industry collaborator, Kadja Mannanen, who will be talking about exploring XR in a performance and live performance context. And then Paul Tennant will be sharing with us a project that explores tabletop gaming, role-play gaming, but the hybrid uses of that and some ways in which technology can be used. So we're really, really pleased that they both can join us today. We've got an interesting setup because you're actually seeing into the Nottingham studio as well. So we've got, it's not your usual Zoom bedroom presentations as well. And so just in terms of format, so we're going to take each project in turn. So first it will be project led by Sarah. I'll talk for about 20 minutes and then we'll have about 10 minutes for questions and answers. So please use the Q&A box, which you should be able to find somewhere in your Zoom window to ask questions. Write them in as soon as you think of them, and we can start hoovering them up as soon as we get to that bit. Then we'll switch to Paul for his talk on his project. Again, he'll talk for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have 10 minutes for a bit of chat. Just very briefly, if this is your first time and don't know what XR Network Plus is at all, so XR Network Plus is a EPSRC research, so one of the UK Research Council's funded projects that's put in place to help the UK explore the research future for virtual production and associated technologies. It's a collaboration between a few different universities in the UK, so leading it, so it's led from the University of York, but it's in collaboration with Ulster University, University of the Arts London, University of Edinburgh, Cardiff University. We've got a programme of project funding, other forms of engagement, including working with academics on early commercial ideas and projects. And we've just launched an R&D challenge, which I'll mention very briefly at the end. I am going to, I'm going to go back. I'm going to come back to those at the end. So I'm now going to hand over to Sarah. And Sarah, you should be able to share your screen when you want to. And over to you to introduce your project.
Thank you ever so much. So this is, as has already been said, a slightly different presentation format for me. So do forgive me if I'm unsure of how anything works, and you'll see me looking off to the side because that's where the slides are for me. But yes, so today, Kadja and also Richard, who's here as well, and I will be talking about the project, the XR Network Plus project, prototyping project that we worked on. But firstly, I wanted to just quickly introduce the space that we're in, the VIP studio, because that is the kind of home for both this project, or the production of our prototype, and then also that of Paul's, which he'll be presenting afterwards. So I don't know if you wanted to do a little swoop around the space that we're in, which I will then explain a bit to you all in more detail when the camera comes back. Lovely. So if you could quickly move forward. So yeah, just to tell you what this is, it's a box, a studio space for creative research, and our mission here as part of the University of Nottingham is to make the kind of immersive production equipment that we've been able to invest in here available to creative partners in the East Midlands. So we're located at the university's Kings Meadow campus, which was actually formerly the ITV Carlton television studios. So this is a production space, and we're bringing back production into the space. And this was a music studio, so acoustically it's a really dry space and a very interesting space to work in. And yeah, we do practice-based research and knowledge exchange here with various priorities. And it's run by the director, Professor Helen Kennedy, who's based in the Faculty of Arts. But Paul and I, who were involved in the two projects that are being presented today, we are co-creative directors working with Helen. I am also based in the Faculty of Arts, and Paul is based in computer science. But we've been collaborating together for over 12 years now, which is part of the kind of interdisciplinary background that this space emerges from and builds upon. And then we also have Richard Ramchurn, who is involved in the Fine Line project I'm presenting, who is a research fellow here, but also the lead artist working in the studio. And we have a wonderful studio manager, Tamsin, who is next door with her little dog, who we should get on camera, but probably won't have time to show you. So just to very quickly give you a sense of the facilities here, I won't go through everything. I just want to highlight the ones that were used, particularly for Fine Line, and then Paul can talk about some of the other capabilities we have. But we have Vicon motion capture, we have depth kit volumetric video capture, we have a Vario XR3 mixed reality headset, and we're waiting for the delivery of the XR4, which is stuck in customs. We have a suite of Quest 2 headsets, which can be used in kind of performance and installation conditions, which is obviously relevant to our work on Fine Line. We have various audio equipment, including the Neumann binaural head microphone, which Lumo Company experimented with when they were here on their production residency. So that just gives you a very quick whistle-stop tour of the context that Lumo Circus Company were kind of coming into to collaborate with us as our first ever international visitors to the VIP studio. And now I want to hand over to Kadia, who was a creative producer for this project.
Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Kadia Manninen, and today I'm here to represent Lumo Company, which is a contemporary circus company from Finland. Richard, I don't know who's operating the slides, but would you mind going on full screen to press present on the corner?
I can't because we've only got one slide.
Okay, no problem. If you go back to the slide before then. Thank you. Okay, so this project, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background how this project started. So Lumo Company has existed since 2016, and I have worked as a freelance producer for them since. So I was also doing a PhD at University of Nottingham at the Center for Horizon Center for Doctoral Training, and I was about to finish my PhD back in 2002, and I was also working for Lumo Company on a freelance basis to produce the new show Fine Line. And post-COVID, post-Brexit, we came to realize that contemporary circus company were facing limited touring opportunities due to the economic instability, but also because the shows were very complex in terms of technical requirements. And these large-scale international shows were costly. And also the business model wasn't very environmentally friendly. One of the findings, in fact, from my PhD thesis was that the traditional ticket sales business model that performing arts organizations typically deploy was being heavily disrupted by digital transformation that is currently taking place within the creative industries. Next slide, please. So in 2002, we initiated this research project on new digital business models for contemporary performance. We had partners from Finland, Latvia, and the UK, and this initial research project was funded by the Nordic Culture Fund. So the project aims to explore basically new business model for performing arts organizations. And how we went about it was that we experimented with different types of business models. For instance, we created an NFT collection. We captured the full show. We experimented with live streaming. And then we had an opportunity to conduct a virtual production residency at the University of Nottingham VIP studio. Next slide, please. And then an idea emerged for an immersive VR performance that is loosely based on the Lumo Company's 70-minute live performance that combines classical music and contemporary circus. So we started to work on this collaboration between Lumo Company, University of Nottingham, Nordic Culture Fund, and then Excite Network Plus as well. Next slide, please. So here's a little video from the residency. Hopefully it works on this mode. It should. I think there's a little bit of an issue with the music there. So this is just a snippet from the residency that we conducted last year. It should have sound, but let's watch it now without sound then.
You would say.
So we tested different techniques such as volumetric capture, motion capture, and 360 video to kind of find the most potential ones for the VR experience. And keep in mind that all these techniques, like Lumo Company had never done any virtual production previously. They had just basically done live shows, so this was all new for the company. And this wasn't very long residency, it's about a week that we spent in Nottingham. I think we can leave it there and move on. So this is the team, the project team. So Hanna Moisala, who's the founder and artistic director, a tight-wire dancer who started Lumo Company. Then myself, I acted as a creative producer for this project. Then Richard Ramson, who's the creative technologist at the University of Nottingham, and then Sarah. We can move on. So last year in August, we were lucky to secure a virtual production prototyping impact and acceleration grant from the Excite Network Plus. And this enabled us to develop a 20-minute VR performance prototype. So the kind of artistic goal for the prototype was to redefine the conventional audience performer dynamics. So giving audience members an opportunity to be active contributions to the performance instead of being passive spectators. We're hoping that the final product can then be taught as a standalone digital experience or used as a complementary component to enhance the live performance. And I'm passing on back to Sarah. No, one more slide and then I'll pass back to Sarah. If we go there, yeah. So the target audience for the final product would be initially arts venues and festivals, but then we are hoping to take it to places where you usually don't see contemporary circus, such as libraries, hospitals, and care homes, and also to film festivals that nowadays commonly have this XR categories. Audience profile, so VR enthusiasts and early adopters of these new XR technologies, individuals seeking immersive and interactive entertainment experiences, and artistic and creative professionals seeking inspiration and innovation. And now I will pass it back to Sarah.
Thanks, Kadia. So yeah, just to give you a bit of a taste of the prototype then that Richard worked on based on the content that was captured during the in-person residency in Nottingham. So the decision with the design, because this was a prototype to kind of showcase the possibilities for the VR presentation of circus performance, 5 scenes from the longer 70-minute live performance were selected and created using a kind of mixture of different footage. So there's some volumetric video, there's some motion capture, there's some 360-degree video, which and these were selected to kind of show that breadth of possibility within this immersive space. And then this material is integrated, including elements of the original audio score into 5 virtual environments. And interestingly, we decided to experiment with Blockade Labs Skybox AI software for the creation of the virtual environments that would then sit within the Unity game engine. So I think if you could, so you know, this was an iterative process for us because none of us had worked with this software before. It was very much one of sort of experimentation and discovery, because you know, it makes the creation of these environments much quicker and cheaper for, you know, experimentation and for small companies, but obviously there are lots of associated issues involved and lots of debates about how these kind of generative software could and should be used creatively. So this was very much a process of experimentation and reflection for us. But it, you know, it automated these processes. But yeah, we need to think about all the implications of that, all the economic implications of that, both in terms of the kind of reduced cost of production, but also in terms of the you know, human input and those skills, creative skills that would go into the design of virtual environments. So and that's something we've been exploring in the audience research as well to get their feedback on these environments. So let's give you a little bit of a taste here of the prototype itself. I suspect that the sound I'm hearing in the space is not coming through to you, unfortunately. Kadia, I don't know if you want to give any commentary as well.
Yeah, that's fine. It's a shame that you can't hear the sound because that's like a very core component of this show, because it is obviously music composed by our Latvian pianist Evalds Lazarevics.
And which features live, doesn't it, in the actual?
Yes, yes, and he has indeed composed all the music, so it's original score. And here you can see Evalds playing in this quite unexpected Nordic-inspired pine wood forest, and we also played a little bit with the like size of the performers. So some of the scenes the performers were much larger, that they would be like almost like giants, and in some other scenes they're much smaller. So that was the first scene was captured using volumetric capture, and then this is a motion capture scene. So we how we prompted the AI was that we wanted like Hong Kong inspired city environment. Obviously this would have been very difficult to create on stage and very costly, whereas with AI you can quite easily get good results. So this was easy to iterate when we created this environment.
Although interestingly, the AI did consistently generate environments where we were high up over the city, didn't it? It was very hard to convince it to come down to street level.
It did, and this is also actually here you actually are again very high up, but that works out pretty well because this is a tight wire scene. So when you are actually in the VR experience, you can like feel like you are standing on the wire. And this is one of the performers, Annina, dancing there very close to you. So yeah, there you can see the wire. Obviously, what we discovered with volumetric capture is that it is still a little bit like an immature technique, and it did struggle a little bit, in particular with the tight wire scenes, because the wire is quite high, so it's over 2 meters high. So this is something with the next phase, which is the commercialization phase, but we really want to improve. So we want to improve the camera positioning and also the rendering of the videos, but this would be the next phase. But with the prototype, we got a really good idea of the potential of the technology. So and that was the main goal. And the audience feedback has demonstrated that the audience really feels part of the performance, especially the motion capture scene that you just saw. You are really next to the performers, and it's sometimes almost like a little bit scary to some of the audience members. But yeah, so the artistic goal was definitely achieved. Yeah, I think we can move on from that.
So yeah, I think, I mean, we've covered some of these kind of findings already, haven't we? But you know, this is definitely a novel way of conveying the essence of contemporary circus. And sorry, I should probably let you speak to the next point, Katja.
Yeah,
so
so from our point of view, from being a small SME, a contemporary circus organization, it was incredibly valuable to be able to work with University of Nottingham. Otherwise, we wouldn't have access to this type of technology and would have been extremely costly. And it also kind of, with Lumo Company, I mean, in performing arts, it's quite common that you might have these hesitant attitudes towards digital technologies still, because performers and directors often feel that the essence of live performance cannot be conveyed through digital means. But this project has really changed the attitudes of the performers, and Hanna, who's the founder of Lumo Company, and they're really keen now to carry on producing other immersive XR experiences as well. So it has kind of initiated this, I would say, this like continuous innovation cycle within the organization. And yeah, I think we covered that already. So what we said, that AI significantly reduced the cost of creating the virtual environments again. So that was a key benefit from the project as well. As said in the beginning, so the goals were to kind of explore the technical and artistic limitations of these technologies. And we have come to the conclusion that we definitely would need to conduct at least one more residency to be able to finalize the touring project according to Lumo Company's artistic vision. Yeah, just to kind of sum up the industry partner benefits there. So we learned a lot about the virtual production methods and their limitations. So headset setup, unit integration, and VR scene building, and especially the possibilities of these capture techniques. It started that shift in attitude and the innovation cycle. And next kind of step would also be to design the business model accordingly. And if we move on to the last slide now. So what are the next steps for the project? So we recently, it was a couple of weeks ago that we presented this project at the Storytellers and Machines, a creative AI conference at the School of Digital Arts, Manchester Metropolitan University. It was very well received by the audience. We actually had the prototype there for audience members to test, and we received some great feedback. We're still carrying on with user testing. So we have conducted some user testing at University of Nottingham, also in Oulu, Finland, and now in Manchester. But I think we will still try to put a couple of users through the prototype. And these results will then, we will analyze the results, and that will then inform the creation of the final product. We are currently fundraising for the commercialization phase. We are seeking funding again from Nordic Culture Fund as well. And starting then to design the business model for the digital product. And as this is also a research project, we are looking into writing some applications about it. Right, I think that's all from my part. Yes, thank you very much for your attention. If anyone has any questions, feel free to post them on the chat. I will answer those.
Thank you, Sarah and Katja. That was really, really good. So yeah, as Katja said, yeah, pop any questions you've got into that Q&A box on your Zoom. While we're waiting though, I've got one. I've got one for each of you. So one for Katja first. So you were experimenting with a sort of range of different ways of using XR technology to deliver the performance. So like 360 film, volumetric capture, game engine produced like mocap driven avatars. Have you got a sense of which one was the most effective, or maybe the one that has the most potential for your context or for producing, in a contemporary circus context?
Definitely. So as I mentioned, the artistic goal for this project was to create something different from the live show. So when during the live performance, audience is quite far, it's a small show, but they're still quite far away. So they are like spectators, and then you have the performers on stage. So we wanted to really put the audience on the stage with the performers. And that was like the most important goal, to do something different with the virtual performance. So we found that we achieved that the best with motion capture and volumetric capture. With 360 videos, it still felt a little bit like watching a video of the performance, and you couldn't really, you could go around them a little bit, but we didn't feel as immersed. So definitely for the final product, we will be using volumetric capture and motion capture, and we are planning on adding a motion capture scene, doing like an aerial acrobatics scene that we will then use motion capture to capture that. And that will be a challenging again, because the acrobats go quite high. So yeah, we'll push the boundaries of the technology again, hopefully.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, that's really good, because that's the segue to the question I was going to ask Sarah, which is around kind of motion capture. So I've seen you've got in your lab, you've got a Vicon set up by the looks of things. I assume you've got inertial motion capture as well. Like each one seems to have its limitations. So I guess the Vicon system, if you're, to Katja's point, want to be 5 meters up in the air and go long distances, then you've got the capture space, the limitations of that. So what are there any kind of like really thorny challenges to kind of capturing like single or multiple circus performers in an authentic way using the motion capture stuff?
Yeah, so I've got one eye on Richard here, who's off to the side as well. So certainly during the first residency, the motion capture was a kind of smaller part. Would you agree, Katja, of what we did, precisely because it wasn't very well set up for the actual content of the show. One thing we have done since is take the Vicon system out of the volume it was in. So that kind of opens up the possibilities a bit more within the space. But definitely the plans for capturing aerial work will be a first for us in here, but we have wonderful height, so it is physically possible. The technical possibilities are something we still.
And if I can add to that, that is rare that there is a space with such a high ceiling, and also you have some anchor points on the ceiling. There was some conduct. I can't remember how there's like a grid, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a lighting rig that holds 5 tons.
Yeah,
I think the hard things with the volcap and the motion capture. With the motion capture, it's a suited capture with reflective balls, but performers don't like to wear weird things on their feet, so we're having to figure out like using tape to stick the reflective balls on their bare feet, which would fall off and attach to other bits of their body, because they do a lot of contact work. So that was a problem with the volcap. And again, having these people up high, it's meant to be, you set up the volcap, you have a floor sensor, and you set it up from there. But everything's in the sky. It's got no point of contact where these cameras are to calibrate a volume. So we had to do it took ages to do that, and we had to do some like weird tricks. Like we actually calibrated it upside down, I believe, and had the floor and the ceiling, because it's the only way that we could make that work.
Yeah, that makes sense. We haven't got any questions in yet. Please do ask your questions if you have them. And I'm just gonna keep going. So one of the things that conversations that we get into in our lab and working with companies on projects up here is around sort of the relative climate footprints, carbon footprints, sorry, of these things, particularly in comparison to live shows, so the traditional live in-person format. Have you done any work, or have you got any insights into that, or is that still a bit of a kind of a grey area? So obviously within our technology world, we're not traveling, people aren't physically traveling to a venue to watch a show, but there are lots of digital processes that are happening, including lots of server-based stuff and cloud computing. So is there any work that's underway or any insights into that side of things?
Well, it's so sustainability is kind of a core research priority for our studio as well. And so these are questions we're thinking about, but I don't think we have answers to yet.
Yeah, we've just worked with Nina Wilmot as a resident here, who's doing a project about looking into the sustainability of virtual and immersive technologies, and digging into like where the rare metals come from and VR headsets, the lack of a circular economy within tech, and we are also in like we're in old Carlton studios. We're repurposing what was like pretty much a dead studio. We've not built this up from the ground.
But certainly these sort of getting away from these easy rhetorics of it's not touring, people aren't getting on planes, therefore it must be a more sustainable alternative. That's definitely something we want to sort of problematize, because if you're using generative AI to do anything in any part of a creative process, then there's an enormous energy footprint associated with that. But those kind of exact processes for quantifying, particularly when you're using technologies that are proprietary, and that's very hard to. But so one thing we've talked about recently is how much processing can be done locally rather than always relying on cloud-based technologies, and how that can provide a means of at least being able to quantify better, and so forth. So definitely active questions. I wish I could wish we could offer answers.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And yes, I think similar from on the work we're doing, it's knowing that there's areas to problematize and then trying to work it through. Because I guess from Kadja, from a producer side, these are important elements, especially where your sources of funding are from organizations that maybe stipulate aspects of sustainability.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. For instance, Nordic Culture Fund, for instance, they aim to be sustainable and support sustainable projects. So for the performers, they try to avoid flying, for instance. They try to travel by land, which obviously I'm not quite sure if it's more sustainable always if you're bringing like a lorry from Finland or a van or something. I guess it is, but we need to find alternatives, and I think it's definitely more sustainable to tour with the VR performance than it is to tour with a live show that requires 5 performers and a big set, if you can tour with a couple of headsets. So in terms of touring, I think it's good to have some kind of more environmentally friendly options.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay then, well, thank you so much. I think we're now going to do, I guess, a seamless transition across to Paul's. Thankfully, he's in the studio with you, so that makes it a bit easier. So thank you to Sarah, to Kadja, And to Richard, thanks thanks for joining in there. Yeah, it's great to hear about your project, and we'll look forward to seeing what happens next with it.
Thank you.
I'm going to swap with Paul now.
Yeah,
no,
I'm going to stand somewhere else just to make things more challenging for Richard.
Tell me when I need to start sharing.
I'm going to come and stand over here. Okay.
Over to you, Richard.
My standard kind of games mastering position. Nearly there, just turning a mic around. So yeah, you could screen share that, Sarah. Be good. Now there will be a point where I'll get either you or Richard to change tabs, but we'll come back to that. I think it is screen sharing. Can you move the slides slightly, Sarah, because I can't see past your head? If you move the slides over to the left side of the monitor, that'll be fine, or just embiggen it.
Paul, are you able to make the slides like in presentation mode, or do you need access to the tabs? Is that
you could certainly try. I need to be able to switch browser windows at one point, so I think we'll do it in the same way, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, that's fine. No worries.
Okay, so getting going. This is going to be a particular level of nerdiness. I mean, it's already quite a nerdy presentation in terms of being about virtual production and virtual reality and all these kinds of slightly nerdy things. But this is bringing it up a level because I'm also adding Dungeons and Dragons into the mix. So I want to talk to you a little bit about our project. It's called Hybridizing the Tabletop. And so, Sarah, could you give me the first slide, please? Okay, so start by kind of, well, pun absolutely intended, tabling the problem. Hybrid meetings are just rubbish. I mean, we're having one at the moment and we're already having issues with the software. You know, the sound isn't playing on the movies we wanted it to, and we're having to spin cameras around, and it's all a bit complicated. It's a bit rubbish for remote participants because they can't really see all that well what's going on, especially in round table situations. So imagine we're all sitting together around a table. Well, the camera needs to spin around and cope with who's focusing. You get all these nasty kind of turn-taking things that have to happen in order to make speaking work. It's fine if somebody's presenting, but not so good if you want to have more of a conversation. It's a bit rubbish for the in-person participants because they lose a lot of kind of access to the remote participants in terms of things like back channeling and that kind of awareness of people. There's something rather nice about being real people around a table. And it gets amplified again when you start trying to do something together. So we used the example of playing a game together, specifically playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons together. And the reason we used that as a context is because it's a roundtable conversation, a roundtable activity that has quite a clear set of rules, but those rules are quite variable. So there's periods where there's control about turn taking, for example, but then there's also quite a lot of stuff going on. There are independent little conversations and back channels that happen. There's rolling of dice, there's moving of minis. There's a lot of things and shared resources that are required around the table. And we thought it actually stood in quite well as an example of the sorts of things people might want to do around a table. And it had the distinct advantage of being the sorts of things I like doing around a table. So that was quite useful. So we thought what we'd do is restrict this problem of hybrid meetings to this relatively small scale, a number of people around a table. And I think we reckoned that maybe 6 was about right for a good game and a sensibly sized table. So could you move the slide on? The project worked with a professional games master. His name's Andy Leach, and unfortunately not able to be here today, which is a little bit of a pity, but he is working, so that's fair enough. And we invited him as a project partner because he brings a wealth of experience and domain knowledge about what it's like to run professional games. And the original plan for our project was that we were going to use our table. So we had constructed this beautiful hybrid table that I'm standing at as part of a previous project. We were going to use it to just play a bunch of games and reflect on what challenges were raised by playing them. The problem is we ran one game and it was just so awful. It was technically problematical. It was audio problematical. It created all kinds of issues for us just trying to manage this game. So we thought that this is not good enough. We're going to have to retune the project a little bit and shape it more around actually enabling the technology to do this job. So if you want to move on slightly, yeah, a little bit of context here. So this is too far away for me to read the slides, so I'm going to have to guess what it was I wrote last month. So what happened essentially is that Andy was running a very successful business in Nottingham, where he was running, he ran a shop and he would have people come in and he would run games almost daily for live players. He would run 8 or 10 games a day and people would come in and they'd pay him to Dungeon Master. And that was great. But then obviously the pandemic happened. That was completely killed as an activity. You couldn't do live in-person games. So like many people, he switched online. And so he started running these online games. And again, this was great. And actually has worked very well for his business. He's expanded globally. He's got players all over the world, which is absolutely fantastic. The problem is, however, when the pandemic finished, so this is not a problem created by the pandemic. The solution was fairly straightforward in the pandemic. When the pandemic finished, people wanted to start playing in person again, but you've suddenly got all these groups which are mixed between people who might be remote or people who've got used to perhaps playing in the evening when the kids have gone to bed and maybe couldn't actually get out to live in-person games. So you have this mix of people that want to play in person, people that want to play remotely. And so the solution to that is and has got to be hybrid experiences. The problem is there's lots of software that's out there designed to support online gaming, and there's a real lack of software that's well designed to support hybrid gaming. So if you could skip on to the next slide, Sarah. This is what hybrid games normally look like. You have a bunch of people sat live around a table, and then you have a laptop open, and on that laptop is a Zoom call. I mean, it's kind of more or less what's happening right now in the studio. But that is not a great experience for the people who are remote because they might have a limited camera view. They might be able to see minis on the table. More often than not, they can't. They certainly can't interact with the stuff on the table. And then the people in the around them are kind of not recognizing them as equivalent. There's something about being Skyped into a meeting. I'm sure we've all been Skyped into a meeting where we're the only one on Skype, and you definitely don't feel as present as you might otherwise. Just as a quirk of AI, I tried to generate an image of a hybrid game using AI, and I could not, for the life of it, with various prompts, get it to replace a person with a laptop, which is what I was trying to do. I wanted to put a laptop facing into the table because that's what actually happens. And it could not understand it, which I thought was quite interesting because it's such an abnormal setup. So there are various ways you can mitigate some of these problems. You can have shared resources, like there are quite a lot of work called virtual tabletop systems. But the problem with them is they expect everybody to be engaged with the virtual tabletop system. And if you're in person, you don't really want your laptop open. You don't want to be playing a computer game. You know, these are analog games. People feel very strongly about them being analog games. So while you could all use a VTT, that's not quite what you want to do. So let's move on a little bit. There are some real positives of in-person play. People get very attached to the physical objects of in-person play. They spend months painting minis. They collect dice. There's also something rather nice about pen and paper style. There's an aesthetic to pen and paper style where you're drawing maps out, and people are playing the games on those maps or drawing them for themselves as they try and work out what's going on. You get these lovely conversations that happen where two people will be whispering to each other and making a plan, or perhaps interrupting each other. It's much more naturalistic to play in person than it is to play online. You also get people's attention focused much better. So people, if you're in a room with them, will pay attention more to you, whereas if they're sitting on a computer, then there's much more likelihood that they might be checking their emails in the background or being otherwise distracted. And that's fair enough. And that's actually part of the appeal of being an online player, is that you do get to do a bit of that, being distracted. That's kind of okay. You also have some agency with the game. You're able to lean in and move the minis around. You can actually engage with the content in a way that's more difficult online. Can you switch to the next one? But online has its own benefits. So the biggest one really is scheduling. There's a running joke about Dungeons & Dragons that the most difficult monster is scheduling. It's really hard to get people into a room together, especially as we get older. And you might assume that the market for Dungeons & Dragons is kids, but it's not really. It's actually adults. It is folks our age. in their sort of 30s and 40s that grew up with it. That's an awful lot of who is playing Dungeons and Dragons now. And actually, it's very often women because it's a storytelling game. Again, it sounds like, and it's well considered to be nerdy boys in their basements, but actually, the female Dungeons and Dragons market is enormous. I think that's partly because it's a storytelling activity. So, obviously, adult age women a lot of the time can't come out in the evenings because child caring responsibilities and so on. So there are some very good reasons why people would want to play online. Another one is you get digital resources. So there are these beautiful maps you can create. Lots of people, particularly during the pandemic, spent a lot of time creating gorgeous maps to play on, and we never used to have that in person because you could never print them. And it'd be really nice to bring that material in. Okay, we could probably move on. That's enough of that. So the key goals in terms of hybrid play for me were, can we take the best things of physical in-person play and the best things of remote play and bring them together in some useful way? Can we integrate the physical components that are important, and can we integrate those good digital components? Can we make sure that the remote players feel like they're at the table, have a decent amount of table presence, both for themselves and for the physical players? And can we ensure that we have a less frustrating experience? Okay. So the first thing I thought was telepresence robots. That'll do it. We've got loads of them lying around. But that turned out to be a terrible idea. So I had thought you could just put a bunch of telepresence robots around a table, and that would work really well. They're great for being moved around. They definitely give you a good sense of remote presence. That's exactly what they're there for. But the main problem is they can't look down. Which sounds like a really simple thing, but if you want to look down at a table, it turns out a telepresence robot, not that useful. They also don't really have any actuators. They can't manipulate stuff. They're really designed for rolling around a conference space or rolling around a meeting space and talking to people. They work very well for kind of networking, but they're a bit rubbish for this job. And of course, they're quite expensive. So our solution, you wouldn't mind, is the hybrid table, which I'm currently standing at. And the hybrid table is composed of a few important factors. So the first of which, in fact, I think you could move on to the next slide. The first feature of that is that there is a tablet that can replace each person. So I don't know if you can see me pointing at it on my screen, but each table setting, and this is table set up for 6 table settings. Each table setting can be replaced with a tablet, so you can swap a person in. And the tablets are positioned at more or less head height so that they kind of feel like they're about the right size. We couldn't afford big enough tablets to make them really head-sized, but one day perhaps. The other core feature here is that there's a 360 camera which is positioned above the table. And what that does is provides a flexible viewpoint for remote players. So instead of looking through the camera of the tablet, which is the kind of normal situation, what they're actually looking at is the view from that 360 camera. That's really important because it allows you to look around the room. Doesn't sound like it should be such a big thing, but it really does matter. Sarah, if you wouldn't mind switching to the other tab on there, that last one. And then if you press the numbers 1 and then 2 and then 3, no, one at a time, and probably the other versions of them. Yeah, okay, so that's a table view. Second one, that's the view of me, and then we've got a view of where Sarah and Rachel was. Now you can pan that around with the mouse, but we'll not bother just now. It's a bit hypersensitive. So if you switch back to the main view. Oh, wrong one. No, still not the right one. Far left. Left tab. Next one. There we go. Right. Right. It's a perfectly rehearsed presentation, as I'm sure you can tell. So the first slide there you saw was with the minis being digitally duplicated. So what happens is when I put physical things on the table, which you may or may not be able to see, can you point the camera just down slightly at the table? You can see some physical things on the table here. These are being today represented by batteries because I forgot to bring any miniatures with me. But in my defense, it's been a busy morning. So physical objects on the table, they get digital representations in the virtual version. And that's really important because what that means is for the players online, and Richard, can you skip back to that other tab, far right one, and then press 1. Those minis are represented digitally. So remote players can look down, can see the map, and can understand it in exactly the same way that the live players are understanding it. So those are the core features of the table. If we can go back to the presentation, and then move the slide on. Yeah, so we can probably skip this slide because it's just a picture of what I've just shown you. Yeah, so the views as a remote player are that you can look at the DM, you can look around the space, and of course you can look at what's on the map, see the minis, move the minis, interact with them because it's a full kind of tabletop system. Move on. One of my favorite things about this, as we started playing around with the notion of hybridity, we started thinking, well, there's two types of hybridity that we can explore here. So one of those types of hybridity is exactly that, is some people being remote and some people being in person. But another type of hybridity, as we started messing around with this digital table, was the idea that we could mix in pen and paper and digital. And I was giving a lecture, actually, and looking at the relatively obsolete document camera. You've probably all seen them in lecture halls. We never use document cameras anymore. I used to when I first started lecturing, but I haven't for a very long time. I realized that a document camera was a perfect thing to point at a map. So I can hand draw a map, point my document camera on it, and then project that onto the physical table. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, there's two reasons. One, it's quite nice for a kind of improvisation, drawing a map like that. But the other big plus point of it is that when you buy adventures, which lots of people do and run them, the books tend to come in A4 format and they tend to come with maps. And so how do you present that map to your players? You either have to draw it out in large scale and present it, or you're doing what's called theatre of the mind, where you're just describing it to them, or perhaps you're professionally printing it. You can buy printed versions of these. But actually what you can do with the document camera is just pop your book on the table under your document camera, and suddenly it appears on the screen in front of me. So I'm probably not going to try and do that live. It's more trouble than it's worth. But you can see in this picture, what's happening is actually it's a tablet rather than a piece of paper. But there's a document camera pointing at what the Dungeon Master is trying to show, and then that has appeared for the players, and they've placed their miniatures onto it. Okay, moving on. If you just press play on that video, actually, because we're using a camera on the tabletop content, what we can actually do is use tabletop software for things like map building. So this is an AI map building generating tool thing, which is very useful for real-time building maps. And that is just appearing directly onto the tabletop. So we're immediately creating these things live in real time and then dragging our minis around on top of them. So the idea was to create this piece of software, which is almost a middleware to whatever other piece of software you want to run under it. And it's just using the combination of cameras. Moving on. The other thing that's really important is dice. So like I said, people have their strong attachments to their physical dice. If you're in the room, that's absolutely fine. You can roll your dice. But one of the things that came out of conversation with Andy is that he does not let people roll their own dice in his games. So a lot of people will just say, if you're playing remotely, just roll your dice and tell me what you scored. But he's running professional games, and for some reason, there is more concern around cheating. And cheating in D&D is a really stupid thing to do because there's no winning the game. People seem to assume that a higher score is winning. So he always uses digital dice. And so he was really keen that part of the system we should implement is digital dice for everyone, not just remotely. And so what we built was as part of the system, we have a dice tray. So you're able to essentially roll dice just by clicking on them. And that works both digitally, as you can see on the left, for an in-person person and for a remote person. And those dice get rolled onto the virtual tabletop. So they appear as 3D objects in that space. You can, of course, roll physical ones. And if you roll physical ones onto the document camera, they're visible to everybody, which is quite nice. Okay. having put in a system that allowed us to track dice, we also needed to track minis, so that was important. But also there are other things you use, cards, counters, all those kind of things. So we created a system of card management and a system of counter management. And these are all fairly normal things for a virtual tabletop system. But of course, what we were building was this hybrid virtual tabletop system. So we were having to take some of the standard behaviors and replicate them in order to make it work. It's been a real challenge to do that. We've built quite a complex piece of software in order to make it happen. And if you want to jump onto the next slide, this is how our minis work. Minis are really important to tabletop gaming, perhaps the most important thing. And so what we did, because we need to have digital twins of any physical minis people have, what we did was come up with a really nice pipeline. So the idea is essentially that you scan your miniature using Polycam, which is actually now freely accessible online tool. You scan your mini using Polycam, you upload it, and then you can immediately import it into the system at runtime. And so we built a runtime GLTF, which is a 3D model format. We built a runtime loader for that, which means that if I, as a games master, decide, oh, suddenly I want you to fight against this tentacled monster, if I haven't got a digital mini for that, I can, within about a minute, have scanned that, have put it into the system, and have put the physical mini on top of it. You get this really nice, really quick pipeline of bringing in physical and digital content and matching it. So it's really important for us to make sure that people at home could scan their own minis and place them on the table, and people in situ could scan their own minis and place them on tables. So using those commercially available tools is a critical kind of factor for us in this. Can we move on? So under the hood, there is a relatively complicated system, and I'm not sure this is the audience for it, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but it's built using Unity's render streaming platform. So what that means essentially is that when you join the game from a website, which is what we were looking at earlier on when I asked Sarah to jump tabs. In fact, you could just do that again for a second. What you've got here is a remote camera to my server. So you're not running an instance of Unity, so this whole thing can run in a browser. Rather, what you're getting is this, this remote camera control. So you're able to, as a player, manipulate the camera, move things around, do what you want to, and that is immediately affecting the servers for you. Can we just switch back to the thing? We have attached to this system, there's a web server so that remote players can access it, but we also have a local web server, which means that any remote instances of players in the local space are connected to the local server, which is then reducing load on the remote server, because actually there's an awful lot of video being shipped back and forth in this. So you're able to control your view from the camera, that then gets streamed into the browser. And locally, we have tablets, which are representing the remote players. Those tablets are actually just instances of the game running, with a focus on the player's camera. So it's quite a complicated system. If you look to the next slide, you can see what I mean of moving parts, but what it actually results in is quite a straightforward experience for the player, because the player just goes to a URL and they're presented with this system in front of them, and they right drag to move around. It's tablet friendly, it's phone friendly. They can look around the space. Their microphones, their cameras are auto selected, and they're able to immediately start rolling dice and chatting and doing all the other things that you need to do in order to play one of these games. Okay, that's enough talking about what's going on. What have we actually found? So we started to find some early indications of challenges and interesting stuff from doing this. And we've run a couple of games now using this system. So first of all, we're finding that remote players are able to kind of participate in out-of-game activities. That was a real surprise to us. One of the reasons, and when we start to unpack this, one of the reasons that remote players feel disconnected is they can't affect anything out of the game, right? So even if they're using a tabletop system, they have fairly limited control. But when we were doing an organizational activity where I was moving some physical minis and then the remote player was moving the virtual minis to match the position of my physical mini movements, they really felt like they were participating, and they gave some feedback that was really adding to their sense of presence, to feel like they were positioning in the participating in the kind of administrative aspects of the game. We found the Games Master is able to focus more on the remote players because they feel like there's somebody around a table, so you actually look at them. Now, the problem, of course, around this is that, and it's a classic indexicality issue, that the viewpoint for the remote player is not necessarily where they are at the table. And that's because we have one single camera shared between all the remote players. So there are still some issues with things like eye contact not quite working as well as it should. It's something we might be able to resolve at some point with a bit of trickery, but it's not something we've done yet. The document camera for our DM, Andy, he called this a revelation. He reckoned it was going to actively change the way in which he played online games. He has always been a pen and paper dungeon master because he's very improvisational. If you're going to run 10 hours of games every day, he doesn't have that much time to do his preparation on a per game basis. So it's really important for him to be able to just draw out things on demand. And having this document camera model where people are putting their minis immediately onto it was really exciting for him. We found that the Unity render streaming platform streaming quality isn't as good as we'd like it to be. It's a bit shaky when it's moving, although it straightens out quite quickly when it stops moving. So as you're dragging the camera around, you get quite a lot of artifacts, but then when the camera stabilizes, it's fine again and usable, which has caused us to then implement a series of fixed positions rather than forcing people to look around all the time. We also identified some new use cases. So Andy was talking about, well, the table is here. People could come to this, but could he be at home and be a remote dungeon master? And the whole system's kind of built around the idea that the dungeon master is running the system, is running the game. So we're having to recalibrate our tools a little bit to support that being remote. And then the other really interesting thing that Andy brought up is that there is a lot of spectator sport around Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games these days. Lots of people watch on Twitch, on YouTube. And so we were thinking about, could we apply the same techniques to a spectator experience? So as a remote player, could I pan around? And that might require us to slightly change the way the system is working, because it would be a little bit heavy if you had, Critical Role can draw 10,000. At one point, they were drawing 100,000 viewers to every show. I suspect they draw a lot more than that now. And there's absolutely no way our system could cope with that at the moment. So we'd have to do some thoughts. Okay, next, and we were pleased to hear last slide. Where do we go next? Well, the studio we're sitting in at the moment is about 200 yards from Games Workshop's head office, Warhammer World. And we're very keen to work with them as a partner. And we've been in some conversations with them about that. Now, Games Workshop, well, they do make role-playing games. It's not their core business. Their core business is something called wargaming, where wargaming is miniatures on a map. Very similar. Tends to be 2 players, heads up. So we started thinking about the variant of that. What does this look like for 2 players? And we started looking at trying to design an experience that would make sense with Games Workshop's core business model. Because what's really important to them is they're a miniature selling company. They make games, but they make games in order to sell miniatures. So if you make a game that's fully digital, that is not going to work for them. And so what we had to do is design, or what we will have to do, is design something where you have physical miniatures, your opponent has physical miniatures, and then we use digital twinning to represent them for each other. So that's the next step for us, is to look at that kind of 2-player version. And of course, to continue working with Andy. So Andy's very keen to be running this software in his business. So he has over 1,000 players, and he's very keen to keep using this platform. And that's great for us because we're going to keep getting data from that. And I'm personally running a campaign using it. In fact, I'm running one at Elveston Castle next week. And so I'm really excited to keep on gathering more data from real users in slightly more ecologically valid environments than our VIP studio. And that, which was done slightly without being able to see the slides, is me done. If you want to give us the final slide. I'm going to come a bit closer for the last bit. Okay.
Oh, that's brilliant, Paul. Thank you very much. And it's so good to see the table in context as well. So yeah, thank you very much. We have got time probably for a question. There's none in my inbox. If anyone wants to ask one, please do. I will think of one if not. I think from my context, maybe not for the rest of the audiences, but just as a measure, like how popular is even just one game? So how popular is D&D like as a worldwide activity? Are we talking millions of players?
Yes. And so I have it more of kind of economy values. So that the value of the tabletop market, or just the role-playing game tabletop market, in the UK is about 20 billion. It's absolutely absurd. Kind of worldwide, it's much bigger than that.
Right.
There are huge numbers of players now. So across the pandemic, I had these numbers when I originally wrote the grant proposal. There are certainly multiple millions of regular players just in the UK. It's an absurd market, and when you then add in the tabletop minis market, so that's through Games Workshop, you then almost double the numbers as well. Now, of course, there's a lot of crossover between those sets of players, but they're not. It's not a Venn diagram that's a circle. There's very much kind of crossover between those. So it's a big market. Now, it's worth bearing in mind that those numbers don't just cover the the games themselves, but they also cover a lot of ancillary markets. So there's the model painting, and there's the adventures that people make, and there's kind of professional model painters. There's the streaming market, which is huge. So the biggest and most streamed channel on Twitch is Critical Role, or at least it was Critical Role. I don't know if it still is. So that is beating all digital games, and it's just 8 nerdy voice actors playing Dungeons and Dragons. It's ridiculous that that's the case.
Yeah.
So it's a huge market.
Exactly. Yeah. So a huge opportunity for the products. Yeah. So I guess the question around sort of the technology then. So with our, wonderful magical toolbox of stuff that is immersive technologies, and there's obviously like multiple different ways of envisaging a tabletop, including kind of using some, I guess, more traditional digital technologies like camera-based things, and even like the document scan is like a really good example of that. It's like a technically obsolete, maybe bit of technology being really useful, but thinking with mixed reality headsets and things like that in mind, is that probably where some of this will just sort of naturally find a home in the headset?
I think that's
head-based stuff.
I think that's going to be a next step for us. So there are some quite successful mixed reality VR tabletop games starting to appear. So Demeo or however the heck you pronounce that is one, which is a kind of virtual reality tabletop experience. You can actually Tabletop Simulator, which is the most popular of the TDS systems, is you can run it in VR. But the collaboration multiplayer experience isn't great yet. And again, thinking about the hybrid experience, now that we've finally got these quite good mixed reality headsets in the MetaQuest 3 and the Apple Vision Pro, the notion that you could sit around a table wearing headsets and just project somebody into the space and have somebody at home put the headset on and project the virtual space in is really quite exciting. Now, these games often run for 4 to 6 hours. That's a long time to wear a headset. Being a bit older, the ones I run are a couple of hours, but it's quite common for games to run between 4 and 6 hours, and so I think there's still some issues around that being a comfortable experience. I'm not sure I would want to sit for that long, especially at home in a headset. I would want the amount of distraction. So it was important for me to think about it in terms of desktops and laptops and tablets and those kinds of engagements. But on the same note, where we're thinking about the next steps in terms of kind of work with Games Workshop and with the kind of tabletop experience, we're very much thinking about headsets, and we're thinking about particularly thinking about the fact the newest version of Apple Vision Pro has got embedded object recognition. So we'll be able to actually recognize the minis. And that's really important because you recognize a mini, you can then present its digital twin for another person. And so we're super excited about doing that. And I've already started the slightly painful process of training my MacBook Pro to recognize minis. And at the moment, that's taking about 14 hours per miniature. So it's not a quick process. So we're looking at games that have fewer miniatures.
Yeah, brilliant. Oh, that's really exciting. Well, Paul, I haven't got any questions from the audience, but that was really fascinating, actually. And thank you for getting a really comprehensive presentation of that. And it's been lovely to see your studio as well in all its glory. I hope we get to see more of that. So thank you. Oh, I was going to say, can we get Sarah back in the shot? So thank you to Paul, to Sarah, to Kaja online as well, and to Richard. Oh, I feel like you should take a bow or something. Don't. But thank you very much. Yeah, for sure. I'm just gonna share my screen very, very briefly, just to make some sort of closing sort of announcements, my little parish notices. So just a word on the next seminar. So we're having August off because we're hopefully all going to get some holiday, but we'll be back in September on the 18th to present 2 University of the Arts London projects, which are both really interesting and explore different aspects of UAL's interests in XR technologies. There's an open funding call for anybody that's looking to explore live performance concepts. It's an RSC R&D challenge. Full details on our website, and closing date is on the 14th of August. And just there's an in-person event coming up as well. So we'll be up in Scotland at Abertay on the 22nd of October. So for any Scottish based or people that want to travel to Scotland, there's going to be a cool event there. More details to follow from that in a bit, but it should be really good as well. So yes, there's my parish notices. Thank you, University of Nottingham crew. It's lovely to hear about your projects. And thank you for everybody online who've joined us. I think we'll call it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.